السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. All praise is due to Allah, and peace and blessings be upon His final messenger. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. Welcome, dear everyone, and thank you for joining today's session titled Unlocking Insights, Quantitative and Qualitative Research. We hope this session provides value, insights, and benefits all participants. May Allah bless our time together and grant us beneficial knowledge. Ameen. I will now hand over to our respected Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Aliyu, to kindly chair the session. Professor Aliyu, over to you.
All right. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Our respected guest lecturer, Professor Abdullah Hassan Goron Dutse, respected dignitaries that have joined us in this webinar, the faculty members, the students, postgraduate and undergraduate students, other visitors. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. On behalf of the Chancellor of International Open University, Dr. Bilal Phillips, and the Vice Chancellor of the International Open University in the Gambia, Professor Mike Tal, I wish to welcome all the guests that have joined us and the participants that have joined us in this important webinar. This webinar is a second of its type. It is a quarterly lecture that the Department of Islamic Economics, Banking and Finance is organizing. The last one being held in the last quarter of last year by Brother Osman Al-Dinar of Al-Dinar, and that we discussed about cryptocurrency from Islamic perspectives. The webinar well attended, and this quarter, the second quarterly lecture, we are bringing another important personality in person of Professor Abdullah Goron Dutse. This is a tradition of the department to continue bringing scholars on board, to bring faculty members and academic community to share knowledge, to share wisdom on matter of concern, particularly on anything that will spark debate and will also shape our understanding on what we are doing in our respective disciplines, especially in social science, in finance, and economics. Today's lecture focuses on unlocking research through qualitative and quantitative, unlocking insight. It will look into qualitative and quantitative techniques, which is bothering many of our students and other members of the academic community, how to combine qualitative and quantitative method together, or even how to carry out qualitative study and to be able to use right from the data collection to data analysis until the end, which is acceptable. What method are you, what technique, what software do you want to use? So also quantitative. So we identify this as an important area that we need to discuss more, to deliberate more by the academic community. So I'm bringing an expert. Without much ado, I would like to introduce our scholar of the day in person of Professor Abdullah Hassan Goron Dutse. Our scholar of today is Professor Abdullah Hassan Goron Dutse, a renowned scholar in strategic management. He's a distinguished professor of strategic management and entrepreneurship in the Department of Management Sciences at the Nigeria Police Academy, Northern Nigeria. He has extensive experience in academic areas, research, and professional consultancy. He has built a strong reputation in the fields of strategic leadership, small and medium-sized enterprises development, innovation-driven entrepreneurship, among others. The scholar is a fellow at INTI International University, Malaysia, and he previously served as a visiting scholar at the School of Business Management, University Utara, Malaysia. Over the years, he has taught and supervised undergraduate and postgraduate courses in strategic management, research methods, entrepreneurship, and general management, mentoring students and early career researchers in rigorous academic inquiry. Professor Goron Dutse has an impressive scholarly record with more than 38 publications in ISI and Scopus Index journals and over 59 articles in other reputable refereed and index outlets. Certainly, from here, you will know who we are bringing on board. Now you put together is over 100, almost 100 publications. He has also contributed in editing books and authoring them and editing them, particularly in strategic component in SMEs, business policy and strategic management. He has published many other chapters also in sustainability and SME competitiveness. His work has been presented at national and international conferences, reflecting his active engagement in global academic discourse. Beyond publishing and teaching, he contributes to academic quality assurance as external examiner and moderator for universities and higher education in Nigeria and abroad. He also provides research, advisory, and consulting services in areas related to strategic planning, organizational development, and entrepreneurship policy. Currently, Professor Goron Dutse is leading research on fintech and sustainability in SMEs, examining how financial technology innovations can enhance resilience, inclusivity, and long-term sustainability within emerging market enterprise. Respected participants, join me to welcome Professor Abdullah Hassan Goron Dutse, a trainer, a facilitator, a researcher, and a lecturer in one of the leading universities in Nigeria. Professor Abdullahi, the floor is yours. فليتفضل مشكورا. بارك الله فيك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. It is my pleasure to be invited. First of all, I have to acknowledge the Chancellor of the University, International Open University, the Vice Chancellor of the University, the Deputy Vice Chancellor Academy, who is my close contact and friend, and then the convener. Good morning to all of you. It is my pleasure to be invited for this kind of gathering, which is a very, very international gathering, a gathering that disseminates the information from the perspective of academic, sharing knowledge so that to benefit. As we are aware that we are in the competitive environment, particularly when it comes to the issue of publications. The researchers, the students, most of the universities now are putting an embargo or putting a policy that before you graduate, you must publish. And then it has become necessary for us to share knowledge, technicality, approaches to see how students can benefit, how students can scale the issue of research in their endeavor. This topic that we are going to, let me start sharing this topic, which is unlocking insight quantitative and qualitative research. I believe most of our students or participants in this workshop are familiar with the knowledge of what is quantitative and what is qualitative. But in most cases, during our classes, we only learn a few areas. There are some technicality in which, right from the researcher interest on the topic that he wants to study, from there, he will be biased to a particular approach or qualitative approach. So in this my presentation, I will try to share with the participant a basic idea, understanding what are the insights about quantitative and qualitative research. Quantitative and qualitative research is a semester course. Virtually, if we are going to use all what is in take, it will take a semester course. But because of the time, we are going to utilize it to the basic area where the participant can understand and get through. In my presentation, I always try to start with the quote by Piton, who said that quantitative methods are no more synonymous with objective than qualitative methods who are synonymous with subjective. Meaning that both quantitative and qualitative, they are research. Quantitative is more with objectivity, while qualitative research is more of subjectivity. So right from the beginning, if your research is basically on objectivity, you are going for quantitative. And then if your research is subjectivity, you are going for qualitative. Because at times, there is a lot of concern when it comes to choosing either quantitative research or qualitative research right from the beginning. Then the second quote is by Paul, who said that a painstaking course in qualitative analysis by John Wing gave me an appreciation the need for beauty and accuracy and management. So if you look at what the Paul is saying, he's emphasizing that one of the beauty of this qualitative and qualitative research is giving a beauty and accuracy of measurement. So whatever you choose, at the end of the day, you are going to have an accuracy and their measurement. And then the last quote is by Albin, who's an American author. So you can still all quantitative data you can get, but you still have to disrupt it and use your own intelligence and judgment. And then if you look at the statement, it's of concern about the issue of mixed method, that if a researcher use quantitative research, at end, he will use intelligence and judgment. And those intelligence and judgment, they are issue of qualitative. So most of the research that combine the quantitative and qualitative research, they are going to yield a better judgment and intelligent judgment. So these are some of the quotes I always try to share so that at least the participant will understand that, yeah, the issue of quantitative and qualitative research is a very, very important aspect to look at it. As I mentioned, at the beginning of any research, participants or the student always try to confuse.
Prof, can you put it on slide mode, please?
Okay.
All right.
Mm-hmm. At the beginning of research, as I mentioned, a lot of students, participants, researchers confuse as what we want to review soon. Are they going to use qualitative or quantitative? That's the beginning. So a lot of research confuse at the beginning. And then after they have confused, they will now ask themselves, are they going to start with the issue or the problem? Because in your research, you have to start the issue. You must have an issue before you arrive at the problem. So that is why what a researcher needs to understand. First of all, try to have an issue. And this is practical issues, probably within the organizations, practical issues, whether within the industry, practical issue within the community, practical issue within the society. Then from there, you embark with the problem in the literature. Before we start going into qualitative and quantitative research, there is need to basically brief for participants to understand what is research. Research is a process of finding solution to a particular problem. Finding a solution to a particular problem. So, for example, you have an issue, you have a problem. How do you solve it? Then you embark on research. Some scholars say that research is the discovery of the solution, is undertaken through a detailed study of the situational factors related or associated with the problem. So if you look at it from there, the first one is more of quantitative research. The second one is more of qualitative research definitions, because you are studying related factors associated with the problem. And then there are two types of research. Basically, we have applied research, we have based research. For example, applied research done with the intention of applying result to a specific problem in the business. Based research is done to enhance understanding of problems that commonly occur across the range of organizations. And then there are two approaches of the research. That's our focus. The qualitative is in-depth study by observing a particular case or one unit of analysis based on observable behavior. While quantitative is the method that employs empirically data to investigate phenomena. So you can see the two distinctive. The first one is qualitative research, which is you are going to in-depth research, looking at observable behavior to come up with the solutions. And then you look at the quantitative research, you are employing empirical data. So you see that from here you can see the distinction between the qualitative and quantitative. The qualitative is more of observable behavior, while quantitative is more of empirical analysis data. So that is basically. So now let's clearly define the concept in very on scholarly definitions. What is quantitative research? As I mentioned, it's explaining phenomena by collecting numerical data that are analyzed using mathematical-based methods. This according to Sakara. And then here, 2020 defined quantitative research as a systematic investigation of phenomena by gathering quantifiable data and performing statistical, mathematical, and computational techniques. So you can see that in quantitative research, it's more of numerical, it's more of quantifying data and gathering information statistically to solve a particular problem. While other qualitative research is method to gain an understanding of underlying reason, opinion, and motivation. It focuses on exploring ideas, experience, and meaning rather than collecting numerical data. So you can see the distinction between that. In qualitative, you are exploring ideas. You are getting experience rather than collect data based on the opinion or perception. So that is why there is a difference. Qualitative research rely on data by the researcher from first-hand observations. I always give an example when you are conducting research. You are trying to find out why young children are smoking. So if you are using quantitative researcher, you can only get perception and opinion. But if you want to get first-hand observations, then you have to be with the children. You have to behave like them. You have to smoke in order to get full information about why are they smoking. So that is the issue of interview. We focus group participant observation, and that's make the difference between quantitative and qualitative research. So there are foundations for quantitative research because I'm going simultaneously qualitative and quantitative at the same time. In qualitative research, describe is a realistic or positivism because we have philosophical fixed law of usually cause and effects. Most of the philosophical research under quantitative research is based on cause and effects. What cause and what are the effects? It's realistic research that uncover is it reality. There is a reliability of the observations and generalizability of findings. The key approach of positivism researcher is an experiment which allows them to test cause the effect of relationship through the manipulations. For example, a study into the impact of global economic crisis of 2007 to 29 on the brand equity of Nigerian-based listed company. From there, you can see cause and effect. Or another example, Analysis of effect of direct investment on GDP growth in Nigeria. You can see cause and effect. So that is, and then for the qualitative is viewed as subjectivism. If you can see that quantitative is positivism, while qualitative is subjectivism or interpretivist or relativist. This belief is not out there to be objective observed. There's no pre-existing objective reality that can be observed. All truth is relatively and is never defined. The emphasis on this qualitative is how people construct knowledge. That is how people view of the result from the interaction with others. So if you relate back to my example, you want to have information, precise information of why children are smoking, then you have to interact with them. Then you get full information about why are they smoking. Without interacting with them, just to give them questionnaire to give you data, they will not give you the reality, why are they smoking. And then for quantitative research also is focused on practical apply, where different view or research are subject to understudy help in solving a business problem. So that is how Creswell are defined, give an example of foundation of the philosophy. When to use quantitative methods? When to use quantitative? This is a very, very good questions. So that at least the participant, the student will understand when to use quantitative and when to use qualitative. First, when we want to quantitative answer, e.g., how many students enroll in PhD program or master degree? So it's going to be quantitative research because we are going to have values figures. Second, when we want to study numerical change, e.g., are the number of international student enrollment rising or falling? It's quantitative research. When we want to find out the state of something, we often want to explain phenomena. Maybe you want to explain a particular phenomena. What factor determine the talent retentions of international students or international staff, for example? First, when hypothesis testing is required, where there is a relationship between employee achievement and their motivation and social background. So you need to test hypothesis. So if you want to test hypothesis, the best answer is to use quantitative research. So types of research, I think I've explained this one at the beginning. So it's just a clear distinction between the basic research and applied research. Basic research usually to discover or expand the knowledge, while applied research is to find solution or understand a problem faced by the organizations, which is why most of our research we practice on that. And the knowledge uncovered can be applied to a wider setting and can be relevant to a wider scope. Mostly you find that basic research are longitudinal, while the applied research mostly is cross-sectional. So most of the basic research is undertaken by academia, and then most of the research applied is taken by a practitioner within academia. And then basic research, the timeline can be determined by the researcher, and then the applied research, the time can be determined by the decision maker. Deductive approach, and then inductive approach. So this one, there are two approaches that are related to quantitative and qualitative research. For example, deductive approach usually is a quantitative approach, because in quantitative approach, you start the issue from the theory, you develop hypothesis, you collect the data, and then you either accept the hypothesis or reject the hypothesis. So that's a deductive approach, and that is quantitative approach. While the inductive approach, which is the other name is qualitative approach process, you start the phenomena. You're observing the phenomena. You want to observe the phenomena. Just like the example I give you, why small children are smoking or smoking in their hand, for example. So it's a phenomena. Then you have to observe the phenomena, analyze the pattern and terms, formulate relationship, and then develop theory. Because in qualitative research, you are developing the theory. while in the deductive research, you are developing the hypothesis. And then the other approach is combination, mixed approach, which we only put silent because there will be a time that a researcher will combine the quantitative and qualitative research. That is called, you add deductive and deductive process. So in this case, it's called mixed approach. That is, you combine the quantitative and qualitative approach. And these are the process. You develop the distinct theory, develop a hypothesis, you collect the data, then reject the hypothesis or accept it. Because mostly if you are doing the mixed method, you have to first start with the quantitative aspects, get the data, run the analysis, then you now support it with the qualitative idea. So therefore, after you reject or accept the hypothesis, then you observe the phenomena, then analyze the pattern, then formulate relationship, and then develop the theory. So that is how the myth method is all about. And the deduction and induction. Mostly deductive reasoning, application of general theory to specific cases. And then deductive reasoning is a process whereby observe specific phenomena and this basically arrive at the general conclusion. And that is the difference between deductive and inductive, and which is similar with the qualitative and the quantitative approach. So now let's move on. We'll look at the stages in the quantitative research. There are about 6 processes of the deductive research. The first one is defining the research objective, then planning a research design, planning a sample, collecting the data, analyzing the data, formulating the data, conclusion, and preparing the report. So basically, these are the steps that if you are following quantitative research, that is why you call deductive research. So you have to follow this process. You define the research objective, and this research objective is depending right from the introduction of your research, the problem statement, because you must have the introduction, you must have the problem statement before you come up with the objectives. You must have the problem before you come up with the objectives. And then put your research design, whether you are going to use cross-sectional research design, descriptive research design, it depends on the objective. Another issue that participants need to understand here is that your research design is aligned with your objective. Anytime your research design has to align with your objective. Then plan your sample, then collecting the data, analyze the data, and formulate. And these are the stages of the research process. As we mentioned, just like the deductive approach, define research design, collect sampling, data collection, analyzing, conclusion. And then this is the flow chart of the research process. If you can see that we define the objectives, you selection of the exploratory research, whether you are going to use secondary data, previous researcher experience cases, and then you develop problem statement, and then you now plan the design, whether you are going to use survey, interview questionnaire, or experimental, or secondary data or observations. And then after you achieve this plan design, then you now go for selection of sample design, whether you go for probability sampling or non-probability sampling. And then next stage, you now gather data collection, field work, whereby you go and collect data irrespective of which one you are going to do. And then with data editing and putting the data, and then data processing, analyzing, and then interpretation of data, and then findings, and then report the findings. So this is basically a flow chart of research process. So, but quantitative research is a very rigor, because once you have an objective, you are trying to strive for the excellence of that objectives. So it's going to be a very rigor, and that is why you want to achieve it. One of the rigor in quantitative research is striving for excellent research and adherence to detail. And then adhere to detail. and adhere to detail of what you are trying to do. Then precise measurement tools are effective. Another important aspect of the quantitative research is that precise measurement. We are going to discuss measurement issues in the subsequent slide. So the most important thing is that you have to have a precise measurement, whereby it's reliable and valid. You must have a representation of sample, control the study, particularly when it comes to the questions. And then it has to be a precision, accuracy, detail, and order of repair. These are very, very important when it comes to Rigour in research. Another issue which is very, very important in the quantitative research is the issue of setting. The location where study is taking place must be defined in advance. This involves control the study because there are two types of research setting. Whether the research is naturally or field setting, whether the research is partially controlled setting in clinic, for example, maybe those who are in the research is going to be conducted in hospital and what have you, and then highly controlled or laboratory setting, maybe the research is going to be in lab and what have you. So you must identify the setting, which is very, very important to know the research. But in qualitative research, as I mentioned, we have two types of quantitative research, researcher control and researcher setting. Example, the most basically type of quantitative research design, there are four, for example. We have descriptive, we have correlational, we have quasi-experimental, and we have experimental. Then in descriptive research, researcher control, uncontrolled, you cannot control the descriptive research. For example, you want to study a number of male and female in the environment. You cannot control when there are 10 people male and 10 people female, and now you decide to say, okay, there are 7 after there are 10. So it's uncontrolled. You cannot control it. And then research setting, usually it's natural and partially controlled. Then correlationals. The correlation also is uncontrolled because the relationship between independent variable and dependent variable is statistically given by the software, whatever you are going to use. So you cannot control it to change it. And then also you can do that in research setting. Then we have quasi-experimental, which one you can partially control it because it's experimental. Maybe you want to pilot study and what have you. You can partially control it in setting. And then experimental, usually in lab, you can control it. For example, you want to study of number of students that have HIV/AIDS disease, you can control it. Maybe if you look at it at the end of the result, if the highest value is large, it may affect your university or it may affect your organization. So you can control it to reduce it so that at least it will not tamper your. So that is why it's controlled. And then mostly this experimental is conducted in laboratory. So steps in quantitative research. These are the steps in quantitative research. We have about 11 steps in quantitative research. As I mentioned, it's just like deductive approach, whereby you start from a theory, you develop a hypothesis, research design, operational concept, selected research site, selected respondent, data collection, data processing, data analysis, finding and conclusion, and then publishing result. Why I always put the last step is very, very important is when you conduct a research, the next is publish. So that you make it available to people, to students, to researcher, to have your finding, which can be used for other purposes. So it's very, very important if you conduct the research to publish it. And this is what we have mentioned, mostly in the research process, quantitative research, you come up with this table of content, research problem and purpose, that is introduction and problem statement. You develop your hypothesis, and then identify study variable and the scope, then discuss on the literature review, come up with your study framework, then methodology, research design, population and sample, methods, and then data collection and data analysis, research outcome, and communication of finding. So that is the basically step. And now, let's look at the qualitative aspect. In qualitative research, there are process which we need to follow it. Number one, identify research questions, because you see that's why the difference between quali and quanti. In qualitative, research questions is more important. But if you look at the quantitative, we are concerned of research objectives. So that's another difference between the two. We are focusing on research questions. You have to clearly define the questions that guide you to the entire focus of what you are trying to explore in the phenomenon. So it's only when you define the research questions, then you now for the next step, which is literature review. In literature review, you have to conduct a thorough review of existing literature on the particular concept that you are trying to look at it. And then it is only literature that will give you gap and refine your research question. Because sometimes after conducting literature review, you need to refine your research questions. You have to go back. Maybe you have identified the existing gap currently different from what you are thinking on the research. Then you now develop research design. And this is including phenomena. It depends whether you are going for grounded theory, ethnography, case study, and narrative inquiry. And then you select sample, suitable sample recruit participants who provide rich, diverse, and relevant. Sometimes in qualitative research, we are using informant as our respondent. In quantitative, we say respondent, but in qualitative, we say informant, because there are people who give you rich information, diverse information, relevant to your study. And then next process, you collect the data. And this collected data, you ensure, such as you use interview to collect data, you may use focus group or participant observations or document analysis. Because in qualitative research, you can do content analysis. In the content analysis, you are just looking at the document of the previous and now come up with your own conclusions. But participant observations, interview are the most important aspect of data collection in qualitative research. And then data analysis, qualitative analysis, we are using coding, categorization, interpretation of data. We are using different approach. Probably you use thematic analysis, which is the most common one. And then you can use other software to analyze you. You use content analysis, or you can use constant comparative analysis. Compare result A and B to get your finding. And then interpretation of data. Consider the implication of your finding and how they contribute to theoretical understanding and practical applications. And then validity and reliability. Another important aspect of qualitative research is you make sure that your data is valid and reliable. Researcher ensure the validity and reliability of your qualitative research by employing such as triangulations, member checking, and peer delivering. Triangulation involves using multiple data source method of research to collaborate, finding to enhance credibility. In most cases, you are combining quantity and quality to use triangulation so that you can make sure that the data is valid and conclusion. And then another process is report and disseminations. After you've analyzed the data, you report and disseminate the information. And then the last one is reflexivity. Reflect your own role as a researcher, including your bias, assumptions, preconception that may be influenced by researcher process finding. Acknowledge and address potential source of researcher bias to enhance trustworthiness of researcher. This is why in most of the research is very, very important of reflexivity. Because as a researcher, you must have a bias. You must have your assumptions. Because if you look at it in the quantitative research, you are using hypotheses. But in qualitative research, you are using assumptions, sometimes prepositions, which is different from the assumptions. So that is the stages and the process of the qualitative research. And then next, we look at the research problem and purpose of quantitative research. This is why the issue of research problem concern, because we are focusing now on the research, on the quantitative research. You have to start with the research problem, the area of concern, the research purposes, which is including the identifying the variable, the population, the setting, and then identify the relationship between variables and indicate population to be studied, research questions using appropriate literature review, important gaps in the research aim that are unanswered, and the research objectives, important issue to be addressed and feasible in terms of capability of the researcher in completing its given restrictions. And then in the quantitative research, after you have identified the research gap, the problem statement, you collect the data. In this collecting the data is literature review. In literature review, you have to go in-depth knowledge about the problem, understanding the knowledge exists to make change practices. The literature review must read a reliable and different source and then provide critical evaluation and summary of the current. It is important to know that one of the key areas of quantitative research and qualitative research is the issue of literature review. Literature review is very, very important. Literature review, it makes your research to be very valid, reliable, and current. Most of research that there are some scholars argue that if you are using a literature review, you have to use not less than 5 years research. But there are such that is predominantly you cannot avoid them. Now, how do you plan literature review? Planning and preparations. First of all, identify your focus. Clearly define the topic of your research. Prepare and narrow it down to manage scope. So don't use a large scope. Set a gap and purposes. Determine what you aim to achieve with your literature review. Establish the background knowledge, research gap, and provide critical analysis. Identify relevant source. Because in your literature review, you have to identify a relevant source. Database, scholarly journal, website. In your field, utilize keyword to get information. You have to identify the source. Reading and research. You gather and critically evaluate source because it's not all the sources that are related to your area. You look at the credibility, you look at the relevance of the literature, methodological rigor, and each source. Take a detailed note for our press key point where necessary, because in cases where you are, after you finish your work, you are testing for plagiarism, the most important aspect is issue of paraphrase. Most students will just copy and paste. And then at the end of the day, you have to go back and paraphrase. And then analyze and synthesize. That's another area in the literature review. In the quantitative research, most of the students or researchers do not how to synthesize. If you ask to do literature review, it's not only about explaining what other people do. Synthesize. There are so many literature, they have similar findings. Synthesize them to become in one paragraph. Not every paragraph to mention what happened in the previous result. Identify themes and trends and synthesize the information is very, very important for literature review. Now, writing organization literature review is to develop a clear structure of the literature review. Provide a context and background. Connect your review to your research. And then finally, revision and finalization. Ensure proper citations, because sometimes researchers make it very difficult to do the proper citation, insert citation and reference citations. And a lot of journalists, after you send for your article for publication, they'll send you back most of the references are not cited. They are cited in the text, but they are not cited in the reference list. So that is why it's very, very proper to make sure that all citations are clearly articulated. Then another important thing in literature review is proofread. This literature review is applied to qualitative and quantitative research. Process, guidance is applied both qualitative and quantitative research. And if you follow this process, I believe in anywhere you find yourself as a researcher, as a student, you are going to scale. Proofread and edit your literature review. Additional tips for literature review is that start early, seek guidance, and take break. What do I mean by take break? If you are doing literature review, you should not spend the whole time. If you feel exhausted, you go and refresh yourself. So seek guidance from the consultation of your supervisors, senior colleague on how to carry about it. Start early time at the beginning so that you can get. So that is about the literature review, and this applies to qualitative and quantitative. And then we now move to the next stage, in the research process, that is study framework. A framework is abstract theoretical basic for study that enables the researcher to link the finding to a nascent body of knowledge. Underpinning theory is an integrated set defined the concept and relationship statement that present view of phenomena that can be used to describe as well as predict other phenomena. So in the quantitative research, we always have framework. And this framework is also underpinned by a theory. And this theory explains the relationship between the variables that under study. So it depends on the variable. Let's say, for example, theory of planned behavior. In theory of planned behavior, this applies to the purchase intention for squarely responsible products. For example, now if you look at this, we have 3 independent variables, we have 1 dependent variable. Attitude to work to behavior is one of the variables, subjective norms, and perceived personal behavior. They are linked to purchase intention to buy a social responsibility product. That is what's explained by theory of planned behavior. So what we are saying that your framework, you must have an underpinning theory that explains the framework in quantitative research. And then after you have defined your methodology, the framework, you have underpinning your framework, the next in the quantitative research is methodological aspect, research design. What is research design? It's also a blueprint for collection, measurement, and analysis for data based on research questions. A sound research design is a master plan on which good quality and great research is conducted. So there are basically purpose of the study. Research design can be in 3, as I mentioned: exploratory, descriptive, and causal design. Exploratory research is utilized when the researcher has very little data to investigate phenomena on the area of inquiry. It's adopted based on the inductive perspective, particularly if you are using qualitative research. So you are using exploratory research design. And that's, for example, a biologist might explore the biodiversity of a particular ecosystem to identify new species and understand the ecological interaction. Or a service provider wants to know why his customers are switching to other service provider. So you have to explore to find out, to get more inquiry about the phenomena. Then descriptive research design aims to describe the descriptive characteristic behavior of phenomena interest without manipulating a variable or establishing causal relationship. Here are some examples of precise descriptive research. For example, a company might conduct a survey to understand customer preference for a new product, describing the demography and preference of potential. So demography will entail gender, and then about the who want to understand about the product. Or a researcher might analyze the use of a specific hashtag on social media platform to describe current social movement or public opinion on particular issues. So all this thing is a descriptive. You want to know the number of something that's under the phenomena of the investigations. And then we have causal or explanatory research. So they are similar. Cause, either cause or explanatory research. This seeks to identify cause and effects. Unlike descriptive research, on which simply describe phenomena, causal research aims to establish cause and effects. For example, a marketing manager wants to know if the sales of the company will increase if he increases the advertising budget. So you can see budget and advertising budget and the sales budget. So it's cause and effect, meaning that the higher the advertisement, there's tendency the sales will increase. So that is cause and effect research. These are basically 3. And there are 3 important things which I quote this from the book of Sakran and Buji 2012, which say that researcher interference. We need to understand that in any research you carry on the interference can be minimal, can be moderate, and excessive. Minimal interference, the researcher interfere in the routine of function of the system. Let's say, for example, when you are collecting data, or right from a time when you have an objective, and you want to make sure that you have achieved that objective. So you have already interfered in the research. You have moderate, cause and effect. You want to study the relationship between A and B. And maybe you have hypothesized that there is a significant relationship between advertising and sales. But after you conducted the research, you find out there is no relation between advertising and sales. So you manipulate to make sure that the advertising increase the sales. And then there is excessive empowerment. This one is happening in lab, in experiment. For example, somebody conducted a test for HIV cases. Unfortunately, he is not positive, but was recorded negative. So that's interference research. So as a researcher, you try not to involve yourself or interfere in research in these three categories. In quantitative research, the next stage is to look at the population and sample. In quantitative research, you must have a population. A population is an element that meets certain criteria, and then the sample is a subset of the population that is selected for the study. The target population, these are the example, you have population, and these are the sample, you can see that. And then why sampling is not used. When sampling is not used, there are sometimes you don't need sampling, you use another method to. Usually for a population size of fewer than 50, it's more appropriate to collect data from the entire population. So no sampling is required. It is also more appropriate to do census study. Example, suppose target population in healthy tourism hospital in Nigeria. A sampling frame lists the 41 health tourism hospitals recognized by Ministry of Health. So automatically, there will be a time you need sampling, there will be a time you don't need sampling. In a situation whereby you have small number of population. So according to the Sakara and Buji 2013, you don't need to have a sampling. You can only use census. And the census, you collect the entire population, serve as your sampling. Where sampling use? So there will be a time when you do the sampling. For example, we hardly know who makes up the entire population. You don't know the number of population totally, or the cost and time constraints. You have the population, you want to conduct study, for example, in Gambia or in Nigeria. The population is too much, and therefore time. So you need to have sample. There is a lot of error and to control and monitor. There is a lot of error to control and monitor because of the larger populations. And the lists are rarely up to date. You don't have an updated list. For example, you want to conduct a research on small and medium enterprises. You don't have updated lists. So the best thing for you is to have a sample. Destruction of sampling unit. For example, Toyota send few car of tests, not all. So because sometimes if there's a population that is not all, maybe the sampling is destruction. You don't have the full total number of population. That's why we give an example. Sometimes the Toyota, if they want to send a new car, brand car, they will not send all. They will only send a few to test. And that's why you cannot judge, generalize the result based on the few. You have to get the total number of populations. And the sample data are sufficient for decision making. So therefore, unless if you have a sample data are sufficient, so that is why you can use the sample design. So these are the sample design was qualitative and quantitative research. If you look at the dimension of the construct, the purpose of the overall purpose of the sampling in the quantitative study designed to generate a sample that will address the research question, but in qualitative study is designed to sample that address research questions. And then the issue of generalizability. In the quantitative study, we seek to form by external validity. But in the qualitative study, we are using form of transferability, which is different from the external validity. Well, in terms of the rationale of selecting the cases, in sampling quantitative study, you are using representative from the populations, while in the qualitative research, the researcher use cases so that they can learn from the experience. In the sampling size, in terms of sampling size, large enough to establish a representative, usually at least 5 units. But in sampling qualitative, usually cases or lesser. But according to the Creswell, 5 informants is okay for you to start qualitative research. That is, you can only interview 5 people face to face. We get first-hand information is far better. Then in-depth research information dimension, the sampling quantitative is focusing on broad information, while in the sampling on qualitative research is focusing on in-depth information. When sample is selected before the study begins, that is the quantitative research. But in qualitative research, before the study begins and during the study, because as you are moving to the next step, you are selecting and deselecting the sample in qualitative research. How selection is made based on application of mathematical formula, but in qualitative, it's utilized expert judgment. And then sampling frame, formal sampling frame is typically much larger in quantitative, but in the sampling of qualitative research, informal sampling frames somewhat are very smaller. Form of data gathering, focus on numerical data, but in qualitative, is focus of narrative data. Step in sampling, identify population, determine sampling frame, determine sampling strategy, determine sampling technique, determine sampling size, and select the actual sampling. Now, identify the target populations. So we have already explained what is meant by population here. So when you do this, you have population of your study, based on directory that you are studying the research, then you can serve as your target populations. And then you determine the sampling frame. For example, if you have a population of so number of people, and then there are some statistical formula that you can get the sampling size. And then sampling strategy has been divided into two. We have probability sampling, we have non-probability sampling, which researchers need to understand. And then in the probability sampling, we have simple random sampling technique, we have systematic random sampling, we have stratified, we have cluster sampling. And then in non-probability sampling, we have convenience sampling, we have judgmental sampling, we have quota sampling, we have snowball sampling. And then what is different between probability sampling and non-probability sampling? Because the researcher need to understand. In mostly cases, in the quantitative research, we are using probability sampling. And in most cases, researcher in qualitative research, we are using non-probability sampling. So sampling technique is very much population and non-zero probability sampling. And then the selection of the probability, non-probability sampling is choosing, it's unknown. But in this one, you have to start from the zero. That is, so now let's briefly explain the probability sampling technique. We have example of the number one simple random sampling technique. It's a lucky draw whereby every member of the population has an equal chance to be selected. Usually it's characterized, generally generalized results. It's easy to understand and it's reliable population framework necessary. And then we have systematic sampling technique. This is a procedure. First unit is selected at random, following the random number, then subsequent is picked with k interval. So that is why systematic. And this systematic sample, you must have the list. That is why you can see the explanation here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 12. You must have the list of the population, number one, their name, address, and what type. If you don't have the sample frame, so you cannot use systematic sampling. It's simple random sampling technique is easier than simple random. It's systematic bias, essential, not random. And then we have stratified. The purpose of technique is to provide a fair representation of subgroup. You have a population who are homogeneous. If the population are homogeneous, then you can use stratified sampling. And then it's a stratum homogeneity and it includes all relevant of subgroup. You can see these are the population, but each strata were selected from the subgroup. And then we have cluster, and the cluster is different from the stratified. In the cluster, we are looking at heterogeneity, while in the stratified sampling, we are looking at the homogeneity. So therefore, in cluster, when the population has heterogeneous group or cluster, so each cluster consists of units with different characteristics, they automatically use cluster sampling. And that is why you can see in this population, we are picking sample from the cluster. And then we look at the non-probability sampling technique. We have convenience sampling technique. This is a completely based on convenience of the researcher. For example, you want to conduct research in a shopping complex. You went to a shopping complex and then you decide any member that entered to that shopping complex, you ask him if he's ready to answer the questionnaire. So we gave you a questionnaire. It's a convenience. It's not everybody. Those who have convenience. Then we have judgmental. This judgmental is technique. Sometimes we call it purposive. The technique imposes judgments such as, example, Nigeria who traveled 10 countries more as they presume to have rich information issue of interest. For example, you want to study on tourism, those who travel abroad. So you can say you must at least travel up to 10 countries, then you can be part. So in the judgmental or purposive sampling, you set a criteria. If you look at this as a population and we select only those with the black, you can see them, these are the people that were selected. So you must have a criteria 1 to 5 at least. So those who satisfy the criteria, they are part and parcel of your population. That is judgmental. And we have quota sampling. It's supposed to have a peer representative of the subgroup. It's very similar to stratified. The difference is that stratified select on from strata randomly, while this technically youth subgroup are selected conveniently until the quota is reached. For example, population of 1,005 elderly living in the residential setting, 1,000 female and 500 males, 100 female and 50 males. So you can select scientifically. Out of 100 females, you select only 100, 10% of the population. So that is the quota. You give a quota that for each population of 10,000, you are taking 10% or 5%. It depends on the populations. And then we have snowballing. This is the respondents are identified conveniently through friend and any subsequent research. For example, you want to conduct a study on those who are smoking or those who have HIV. You cannot get them in the hospital sometimes, but through friends, if you meet somebody with HIV, he can connect to the next person, and that person he connect to other person. So it's a connection through a friends. So sometimes it's a non-probability sampling. So that is then sampling size determinations in quantitative. Use a sample size calculator to get it, following statistical rules. And there are some scholars like Hare 1998, and he gives 20, at least 20. And then there is a minimum sample size required 30 statistical. And then there is a sample guideline by Sakara and Buji 2013. In general, if you have population of 500, maybe 30 is okay. Or category, if you have 30 per subgroup, and the multivariate analysis 10 times number of the variable of the study, and then in experimental 15 to 20 per condition. And then you can use also sample size for given population by Crazy and Morgan 1970 to determine the sample size. And then in qualitative research, the sample size require usually the rule of saturation. The theoretical sample size is already guideline. Qualitative research aim to understand a fairly homogeneous group, require 12 in-depth, so at least 12. And then if that is if it's for interview. So this is according to the GES 2006. While for a fairly heterogeneous population, 25 to 30 interview are needed according to the Creswell 2007. And then sample technique for qualitative research. Qualitative sampling is used non-probability sampling. As I mentioned, mostly in qualitative research, we are using non-probability sampling. For example, purposeful sampling, focus group, interview, and snowballing, observation, ethnography, case study are employed in qualitative investigation. It is important that subjective are chosen in such a way that reflect the diversity of population. As we mentioned, the quantitative research is more of objectivity, while the qualitative research is more of subjectivity. So it's very, very important if you are using qualitative research to use subjectivity because it reflects the diversity of the population. These are focus group discussions. These are the interview. So when to use qualitative research? There are some reasons why you are using qualitative research. If you look at the other part, we have discussed when to use quantitative research. Now we are back to qualitative. If you want to explore new problem, that affect the phenomena. So the best approach is qualitative research. Understand the behavior. If you want to understand the behavior of the environment or the people or the respondent, so the best thing is to use qualitative research. Design the product. If you want to design a product, use qualitative research. Improve the user experience. If you want to improve the user experience, and if you develop a strategy, for example, brand perception study, product usability research, organizational cost assessment. All these are examples that you can use qualitative research. Then, after the sampling, the next is issue about questionnaire. These are the collection data. The questionnaire is a data collection method. Respondent asked to respond to the same set of questions in predetermined way that can be. And then the questionnaire is a pre-formulated writing set of questions which are respondent recorded this. Sometimes in the questionnaire, you can use positive and negative statement. And then the limit of a particular question with a rule of thumb should not be 20 words. That is one line print of questionnaire. The advantage of questionnaire is less expensive, greater anonymity, easy, fast, ability to replicate, reduce bias, less instructive, and others. Method of questionnaire, the portal, online, delivery, collection, collector administration, and others. Identify source of error in questionnaire data, random sampling error. There are systematic errors, which cause mistakes. And then step in developing questionnaire, identify measurement scale, choose choice of measurement scale, develop measurement scale, convert scale into questionnaire, identify demographic variable, prepare cover, and pilot test. There are some information that if I'm going to explain it, it takes us about many hours, but I'm trying to highlight the key points so that at least the participants understand, and then they can consult their books for detail. And then step one in the questionnaire is that you don't have to look at the issue of validity and reliability. If you want to adapt a questionnaire, you must understand that this questionnaire, they are reliable and valid. Because most of the researchers, when it comes to qualitative or quantitative research, if you are adapting a questionnaire, they forget to look at the issue of validity and reliability. And validity is measuring the concept you're supposed to measure. You make sure that the items that you are going to use for your questionnaire, they are measuring what they are supposed to be measured. And then for reliability, the measurement items show consistent response. That is why we use Crumba Alpha to test the reliability. That the previous research that you are going to use their questionnaire, they are reliable. And then that is the measurement validity. You look at the content validity, you look at the construct validity, whereby you look at the convergent validity, ABE, composite reliability to make sure that all the value achieved. And then if you are using predicted reliability, refer to the measurement scale to make sure accuracy. And then you look at the reliability tests. That is why you consistently making sure the items are reliable at different times setting. You can also conduct retest reliability, degree to which scores are consistency over time, and internal consistency reliability using Crumba Alpha. The second step in questionnaire measurement is a criteria that's identifying scale. You make sure that each questionnaire, whether they have scale, is 5 scale, point scale, 4 scale, 7 scale, and what type, and this scale are reliable. And then now stage 3 is you look at the measurement table can be checked using this research question, hypothesis, variable, items, reference, because if you are checking the measurement of questionnaire, you can use for each relationship, you find out the variable and the question where you want to adapt from which reference. And then convert the question into scales. That is normally like a scale. This is how you develop questionnaire. Then you pick from the literature review the one that is suited for your questions. And these are just an example. And step 6, you prepare a cover letter before you test the questionnaire. You conduct a pilot test to make sure that the questionnaire are reliable and measurement. And this can be applied to quantitative research. And then you conduct the pilot test, and then you encourage participation by guidance, advanced notifications, using strap, and having price draw participation, assuring competence. Because if you want to conduct a questionnaire, you have to have a cover letter. That cover letter needs to encourage participants to make sure that they have participate in the questionnaire. Because sometimes you give a questionnaire, the respondent will just keep it in their table, they will not respond. But there are some words that will encourage them to participate in the questionnaire. And then after you get the questionnaire in the quantitative research, you edit the code, editing the questionnaire, you code the questionnaire and you data entry into data, and then you collect the data, use other observations, interview for qualitative research, and describe the procedural selection. And the source of data, primary data or secondary data. It can either be primary data or secondary data. The interview, it can be a structured interview or unstructured interview. The interviewer does not enter the interview setting questions without questions planned, but the structured interview is the one that the researcher already planned the questionnaire. Data analysis. So after you collect data, then the next one is analyze for both qualitative and quantitative research. In data analysis, you are reducing, organizing, and giving meaning to data. And then in qualitative data analysis, there are processes which you need to understand. First of all, organize and prepare data. Then secondly, data familiarizations. Then number 3, initial codings. Then refining your coding. Then develop your terms, and relating terms, and interpretation and reporting. So that is how you can do for your qualitative research. Then in quantitative research, data coding, you assign the number to each and every response. You data into SPSS, and then editing data, you look at the inconsistency response from the respondent, illogical code, and then you remove them from the, and then you now transfer the data into SPSS, then you analyze it. And then you have to conduct what you call preliminary analysis to make sure that missing value of outlier were treated. And you have to look at the issue of type 1 error, type 2 error, that the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when it is actually true, or probability of failing to reject the hypothesis when that alternative hypothesis is actually true. So that is, and then you choose the appropriate statistical techniques. So in quantitative research, there are different statistical techniques that you can use to analyze your data. One sample test, there is independent sample test, there is chi-square, there is ANOVA, there is a multiple regression analysis, there is a smart PLS, there is a WAP PLS, there is Amos graphic. There are so many statistical use that you can use for quantitative research. And same also, when you go to qualitative research, also there are different methods to analyze data using the qualitative research software. For example, there is Atlas, there is InVivo. All of them, they are a way to analyze data. So if you are using qualitative research, then for example, these are just a box to indicate, for example, if you want to run linear regression analysis, these are just an example in quantitative research. For example, if you have one variable, and then if you involve the variable has an intervening variable like mediation, like this, so you can also run. In the structural equation modeling, we have a summation software for analyzing the quantitative analysis. We have PLSM, we have CBNSM, we have a double starter, Lizrel, eBus, and what I do. In regression analysis, we have Ademco and eBus. In quantitative research, interview, you transcript. Sometimes you conduct your research through interview, or transcript a focus group, answer to open-ended question, transcript it into a video recording, account for experience with the product on the internet, news article alike. And also, you can use the data reduction, data display, drawing, and verifying conclusion. In data reductions, you code analytical process through which the qualitative data have gathered, are reduced, rearranged, and integrated to form a theory and the categorization process. Data display, taking your reduced data and display them into an organized condense. Sometimes in the qualitative research, you can use chart, matrix, diagram, and frequently. So all these things are very important, and because of the time factor, and then I'm trying to draw the conclusion. At this point, while you answer your research, a question by determine what identified terms stand for. That's in qualitative research. And the research liability in qualitative research. We have category liability. Depending on the analysis, ability to formulate category and present competence, we have inter-judge reliability. Can be defined a degree of consistency between coders processing the same data, according to Kalajian 1977. So validity in qualitative research. Validity refers to the extent to which qualitative research results accurately. So because in the qualitative research, you are concerned of accuracy. And then if you look at the validity, we are looking at external validity in the quantity. But in quality, we are using internal validity. So it can be categorized or transformed either to context into external validity. Characteristics of data analysis. It has to be transparency. It has to be used systematic approach, discuss contradictory data, divergent findings, multiple coding, credible result, and justify your conclusions. How should qualitative results be written? Show the most relevant information in graphs, figures. That is why most of the times, if you are doing interview, you need to have a picture. You snap the picture of the respondent so that it will reflect in your findings. Include data may be in form of pictures, artifact, note, and interview. Clarify unclear points, because in quantitative research, you have to explain more as more. Then present result with short discussions, explain them, and then include negative result. That is why advantage on qualitative research. You are explaining both quantitative and negative result. And the research report and the communication of findings. Summarize major element of study and identify contribution of study through nursing. Present a professional meetings and conference and publish a journal. Because whenever you conduct research, either qualitative or research or quantitative research, the most important thing, present the result in the meeting, in the department or faculty meeting, in the conference, in the published journal, so that you can get feedback about what you have done. And then these are the process of writing report for both quantity and quality. The key purpose of writing report is to file clear descriptions, and then some simple description report, comprehensive report, presentation of result of the study, the recommendation to solve the problem, to be effectively communicated with the sponsor. If, for example, research is sponsored, before you publish it, you have to discuss with your sponsorship that, yes, this is what I find. If you are satisfied, then you can go for. Then content organization, writing report, oral depend on the purpose of the research for the audience. And these are a characteristic of well-written report. It has to be clarity, conscience, coherence, emphasis on important aspects, meaning and organizational paragraphs, smooth transition from one topic to another topic, application of choice of word and specificity. The content of research report. This can be a content of research report if it's a research report. Title, executive summary, table of content, list of abstract, authorization letter, introductory section, the body of the report, file the report are reference. But if it is a research that you are carrying out, whether undergraduate, postgraduate, it has to follow the process of or paper, abstract, introduction, which compile purpose, literature, framework, and hypothesis, the method, design, sample, and certain tool, result, data analysis, and process, discussion of finding, a reference, and this thing. And another important thing in writing research report is scheming the research report. Make sure that after you conduct research, whether quality or quantity, you must scheme the research report. You make sure that you review. You read the title, name, after introduction, everything is clear, examine the conclusion and implication that align with the objective, and give preliminary judgment of the study before you present. How can you assess your report? A comprehensive research report, type of study, available, expertise researcher, replication, funding of research, you have to mention it, analyzing the research, examine the part of the report, in-depth accuracy for where the research is logically presented, examine the scoring section is very, very important. Now, before I conclude, the part of the report is that unlocking insight is numbers give you scale, story give you meaning, together they give you power. So it's not just about the approach. What are the insights? Not just a data, but the insight is the numbers give you a scale. The stories, if you look at it, the quantity give you a scale. The stories, which is our quality, give you a meaning. And if you add them together, quantity and quality, they give you power. So unlocking insight, quantitative and qualitative research is give you power as a researcher. I always advise the participant and the researcher that in any activity you are doing, you maintain hope. You can see this diagram is showing that the person is digging to find out whether he's going for quality or quantity. At the end, after he succeeded, finish the digging of the quality or quantity, he come up with the laughing smile. Don't work hard, work intelligence. Sometimes the participant, the researcher, always work hard to see that they get the best. It's not about the work hard, work intelligent. If you work intelligent, you are able to get perfect. Thank you for the listening.
Inshallah. MashaAllah,
the
MashaAllah,
moderator,
MashaAllah. Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes. I'm with you, sir. Such a wonderful presentation. Very much delighted to listen to you, Alhamdulillah. And I believe all the participants, the students, the faculties are also, appreciative of what you presented. Prof, we have some questions, and before we, finish the seminar, we need to take some of them.
Yeah.
Let me just read. Some of them are general because incidentally today we have a research methodology class, and I asked
Okay.
them it's mandatory to continue to join. So
Yeah.
some of them asking questions like what is the minimum number of the paper they need to write, and what is the difference between proposal and thesis kind of thing. So I think this is in general, but someone asked the question, no, sure. Okay, the different one. So basically, these questions are general. All of them are general, but I don't know if Sister Iman, you have any question, very specific. I have one, but before I make any question, no, I want to hear from students.
Well, one of the questions is, I believe, what is the difference between writing a project and a thesis? And what is the minimum and maximum word count for writing a thesis?
Yes, that one, that's why it's institution specific. He is asking question related to IOU because they are my students. I asked them to join, so they want to know. So that one will address it, inshallah, in class. In fact, there are guidelines. If he cares to look into the portal, there are guidelines for the word count and all these questions. And that's why I'm not putting it to Professor, inshallah. We'll
Yeah.
address that.
Okay. So I already shared with you the questions, dear Prof. So you
Yes,
are
sir.
yeah. So
Prof,
you
some
are the
students
expert.
ask, or rather researchers sometimes are finding it difficult to combine qualitative and quantitative throughout. Some, when they start at the primary data collection level, and when they go to data analysis, it is not really combining, it's not balanced. Of course, like you mentioned, sometimes one will be biased in quality or quantity, but I think you need to elaborate more on combining qualitative and quantitative and when to ensure balance and when to do maybe to emphasize one method over another. If you could elaborate, please.
Okay. Thank you, Prof, for your questions. It's a very wonderful questions, particularly related to the area of the presentations. Also, let me answer your question before I go to the word proposal and thesis. The quantity and quality, if you look at it, I mentioned that why we use quantity and why we use quality. It depends on research you are trying to investigate. Usually, right from the objective, what do you want to achieve? I mentioned, for example, if you want to study the behavior of individual, definitely you are using quality. But if you want to understand the perception, the opinion of the respondent, then automatically you are using quantity. So using quantity and quality depend on the objective of the research. What are you trying to investigate? That's the first thing. But there are some scholars, like I mentioned, Creswell. Creswell is one of the scholars that are on the view that there is need to combine both quality and quantity to quantify, to make sure that whatever you find out in the quantity, you can justify in the quality. So Creswell supports this method so that you can use the same information or the problem statement you arrive at your background, you can just adapt the questionnaire or interview question with not more than 5 to justify what you are finding in the quantity. But basically, it depends on the student, the time and constraint. A qualitative research takes longer time because you have to go and go. You want to make sure interview. If you have conducted the interview, sometimes you go 5 times, 7 times before you get the respondent because of the availability I should do times. For example, you want to study the nature or attitude of the governors in Nigeria, for example. To meet the governor, it's not easy. You spend how many times? So therefore, it takes longer time. So most of our researchers, why they have to go to Quanti is because of the short period of time. So that is why a Quanti usually is a concessional research that takes only small time, while Quali usually is a longer time issue. So it's depend of the researcher, the time constraint, cost constraint, because the interview method that you are going to face maybe different time, different situation, different places, and what have you. The cost, most of our researchers probably don't have enough money to. So that is why it depends on the researcher now to decide to go for this thing. But the difficulty is because of the time. That is why most of the research, even if they started to combine the two, when they found that they're having difficulty in qualitative to get interview or to get focus group or to observe, then they now opt to quantitative research. So that is basically my understanding why some students opt to one aspect or the other. Thank you, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Yes, another question is on about publication. Although another student asks what is the difference between project and thesis, if you want to talk about it in general. But then after that question, we have another question, whether student project can be published. So I want you to talk more about publication here.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof, for your questions. Let me go first on the issue of proposal and thesis. Why? The proposal is a first stage of the research. Usually before even proposal, in some university, they have what you call synopsis, presenting idea. You have to present your idea to some group of scholars, then you go for proposal. So if a proposal is a first stage of the research, that this is what you are trying to propose, what you intended to do. That is a proposal. So you have to present it, and then you get respondent from the expert in the area, whether what you are proposing is a researchable or is not researchable. That's a proposal. But a thesis is a complete, right from the chapter 1 to chapter 5. So usually a proposal is only chapter 1 to chapter 3. What you intended to do in chapter 1, what you intended to do in chapter 2, literature review, and what you intended to do as a methodology in chapter 3. Without finding, result, and discussion, without conclusions. That is a proposal. But a thesis is a complete project that combines chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5. So that is why the difference between this one is a proposal stage, whereby you are proposing what you intended to do. But the complete thesis is what you have done. Past tense. Mostly, we differentiate proposal and thesis in the English nature: past tense, future tense, and past tense. Proposal is a future tense, what you intended to do, while the thesis, past tense, what you have done, and you want to present the results. That is clearly different between the two. And the number of proposal and number, it depends on the university also. In some university, they may say for each and every chapter 1 has to be not less than 20 pages or 15 to 20 pages. Literature review, not less than. In most university, proposal not more than 80 pages, include the reference. In some university, 120 and above for thesis project. So it depends on the university and the postgraduate school guideline. That is. Then the issue of publications. You see, thank you for bringing the issue of publication. Another key area of publications, it depends on the quality of your qualitative research or quantitative research approach. There are some journals, they are specifically for qualitative research. Whenever you send your article into them, they reject it. There are some journals, they are of quantitative research, and there are some journals, they combine the two, both quantity and quality. So it depends on the quality. Publication really depend on the quality and rigor of your approach, whether you use quantity or quality. So that is why this presentation is oft decided to look at the rigor of each concept approach we have mentioned, either quality or quantity. then you make your publication, because it's not easy. High impact journal, they prepare you to have sound and quality approach of research, whether quality or quantity. And then it depends on the quality of research, they will accept your publication or not. Let me just give you an example. If you are looking at the citations now of the article in the world, you look at the hair, you look at the Christian Ringel Saturdays, and probably if you go to Malaysia, you look at the Professor T. Ramaya. So these are the people you look at there. They are expert in the methodological approach of quantitative. And that is why whenever they send the article, they short time they publish. And that is why they are the most, in part, the higher Ringel, they are the most higher cited in the world because of rigor of quality. So your ability to understand the quantitative aspect and qualitative research will enable you to publish in high impact journals. So although the criteria items of what are supposed to be in publication is quite some little different between project and publication, because in the paper article you are summarizing some key aspects. Probably, Professor, in the subsequent time we can have another time so that we can discuss how to publish in high impact journals so that we can go deeply on the publication. But normally in publications, you follow nature of the article, project written, for example, introduction, then literature review, then methodology, then the result and discussion, then conclusion. So in look at this is like that, but in summary, in the article publication, in detail, in the thesis writing. So thank you very much, Prof.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Thank you very much, Professor, for this thorough answers. So far, I have not received any other question. And I think the time is also, we have already reached the time that we put. But let me just make additional comment. Alhamdulillah, Prof, among our participants are postgraduate students. Some are doing PhD, some are doing their masters, some are undergraduate final year. So we combine all of them. And of course, we invited others from outside. They happily join us. And I'm sure what we have delivered today have brought some light to what they are doing. I found some students a bit stuck, and I have interaction with them. I found your presentation clarifying a lot of those problems that are having. That which method, quali or quanti, you have clarified clearly. I will not repeat anything because your presentation was very clear. So I really thank you very much. And at this juncture, I will just ask if you have any additional comment to make or concluded remarks before we call it a day and give before we got the vote of thanks and call it a day. So Prof, if you have anything to add, these are the participants, and there are many. They are from all over the world, different countries, but they join us on YouTube.
Yes. Thank you very much, Prof, for this. First of all, I have to thank the management of the International Open University for giving opportunity and organizing this kind of seminar. It's very, very important to organize this kind of seminar and to share more light about a particular concept which is more attractive. You look at the issue of quantity and quality, it has been there for a long time, but still, whenever we are discussing it, we are
yes.
to freshen ourselves. So it's not easy. It's not easy to do this. It's very, very, and I appreciate all participants and organizers for giving opportunity to share our knowledge, and inshallah, this is serve as a beginning of the collaboration between ourselves and the university in the future. Thank you very much.
All right, Alhamdulillah. Thank you very much, Professor, for the concluded remarks. At this juncture, I can offer on behalf of the Vice Chancellor, on behalf of the Chancellor, the Vice Chancellor, and the entire management of IOU, a vote of thanks to you for accepting to deliver this webinar, even though without any formal whatever commitment from our end, but you have agreed to deliver that. We really appreciate you for sharing knowledge with our students, with all of us. Our faculty members also, they are actually with us in this webinar, and our entire management, they have followed it. So we thank you very much, and we hope in the future, like you rightly say, this is the beginning of the collaboration. Inshallah, we hope anytime we knock at your door, you will open it as you did this time. And inshallah, we will continue to come again and again, so that to enlighten our students, to foster education, especially in our countries, in the Muslim world and globally, so that we can ensure quality and excellence in whatever we are doing. So with this brief word of thanks, Jazakumullahu khairan ya Sheikh. We pray for Allah to accept your ibadah, your Ramadan, and Allah answer all your dua in this holy month of Ramadan. With this, I end the seminar. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين جزاكم الله خيرا sir. Inshallah, till we talk. And the sister. And the two.